Hello again everyone and welcome back to the Underground. This is the Intel update for March 16th through the 22nd, 2025. So let's get right to it. Starting off in the Southeast region, just touching on things that have happened in Washington, D.C. this week. As we all know, the JFK files were released. Tens of thousands of pages of documents have been posted online in several batches. So anyone interested can definitely go check them out if you wish. So far, there hasn't really been any one single smoking gun document that says who did it, sort of thing, which I don't think anyone was really expecting, but most of the documents so far, the ones that I've looked through myself with my own eyes, seem to really just kind of confirm what we already sort of know. Now, a lot of people who have not been following the JFK's sort of investigation, and not necessarily the details of what is essentially just a very famous murder investigation, but more along the lines of the international espionage that went along with this investigation. A lot of people are going to be very surprised when they learn certain details of this investigation and the international connections and things like that, but for the most part, anything controversial has largely been ignored, but this may change as time goes on and people start digging down into these documents. One thing to remember, though, that when it comes to a very large conspiracy that goes back decades, right, spanning many presidencies, we have to remember that there may be a reason as to why these documents have been released during this period in time. So it could be a more deliberate timing to coincide with maybe a softer landing, so to speak, with regards to the revelations that some of these documents may bring to the table. So same story with the Epstein documents. There haven't really been any developments on that, with the exception of the DOJ announcing that they are mobilizing over 1,000 FBI agents to comb through the Epstein documents to see what they can release or something to that effect. I'm not really entirely sure. Once again, these documents were supposed to be on the Attorney General's desk a couple of weeks ago now, so I'm not really sure why they need to be gone through again, except for, reasons that we probably already can guess, especially considering the personnel changes at the FBI. Of course, we know that the leadership of the FBI has changed, but all of the field agents are still the same agents that have been employed by the FBI for decades now, right? So just because you change the leadership doesn't necessarily mean that you change the people in the agency. So of course, expectation management is key here, and once again, I don't think anyone's holding their breath on this. Other developments in Washington are the Department of Education has been dismantled or ordered to be dismantled by an executive order or executive action. It's hard to tell these days what's the difference between an executive action and an executive order these days, because some of these executive actions are not being listed or numbered like executive orders traditionally are. However, in this case, if you read through the document yourself, you can see that it's mostly meant to make the Department of Education toothless. For the moment, there's a lot of money involved in the DOE, so that's got to be kind of ironed out. You can't just write one document that says be gone. You have to sort of account for things, and eliminating a cabinet position is going to take a lot of time, but this is one of those things that we can see the order being issued, but we'll have to see how many months down the line is the Department of Education still a thing at the federal level. So again, something to keep your eye on. This week's theme has generally been the judiciary, causing a little bit of consternation amongst really all of government in the form of random judges throughout Washington, D.C. just declaring things. So once again, just as a reminder, the transgender ban of service members in the military, it doesn't explicitly say the word transgender in the executive order. However, the content of it really just kind of is a transgender ban. And also the deportation flights of Venezuelans to El Salvador was halted. They were halted by two separate judges. We know how the story goes. No need to dwell on it too much, but I guess the Department of Defense is definitely having to answer some questions now as to why their operational actions are being second-guessed by a judge. I don't know how this plays into national defense. I kind of touched on it, but I don't think very many other people have this concern, so that's why I touched on it. But anytime a judge can tell a military unit what to do as opposed to the commander-in-chief, that's kind of a problem, and I'm just kind of confused as to why not that many people seem to be noting this. But either way, very kinetic week in Washington, so let's go ahead and move out west. Talk about another controversy that's kind of developing. This has been more of a thing that has been focused on by a lot of people out west in some of the more open lands around the nation. But this is a controversy that has erupted from the White House and the Department of Interior and the Department of Housing and Urban Development, announcing that they are, from what I can understand, essentially trying to sell off America's public lands to put in cheap housing. I know, not the most popular way of phrasing it. I know it seems rather biased, but I would rather strongly encourage you to take a look at the primary source, the website from the Department of Interior. They published a video and a longer text-based article on essentially trying to turn America's BLM lands, specifically, they're targeting specifically rural areas for urbanized development, specifically to put in what sounds to me like Section 8 housing. Now, I don't know if that's true, but it's what it sounds like, so I'm definitely open to other interpretations, but it certainly seems like that's what's going on. So yeah, just something to keep in mind, something to be mindful of, especially if you live out west and near some public land. Moving around the nation, I did want to highlight the recent attacks on Tesla vehicles, dealerships, people who own Teslas, and so on and so forth. Here is a map showing the general locations of all of these attacks that have occurred over the past few weeks, really. And as we can see, it's fairly nationwide at this point. So I know that a lot of very big social media accounts, especially Elon Musk himself, have stated that this is a coordinated and well-funded attack. I have not seen any indications of that. This seems to me like just local Antifa, usual suspects targeting things because they can. At most, you might have a group of 3 or 4 people, a local cell in a local city to try to attack Tesla locations, but for the most part, we're not seeing the kind of roving, flown-in protesters, demonstrators, rioters, kind of thing like we saw over the past few years. These are more along the lines of just local people who are attacking these sites in their local areas. You can see this based on where they are arrested. They're not, they don't have like mailing addresses based in other states. They're all local people who have been arrested so far. Moving overseas, let's touch on Western Europe for just a moment. Again, diplomatic tensions have remained fairly constant since the American election, but lately there have been a little bit of tit-for-tat kind of diplomatic actions. The latest round of sort of pushback or poking of the United States has been in the form of several nations issuing travel warnings for their citizens that they may be detained and deported from the United States if they visit on a tourist visa or something like that. This is obviously more of a political thing than a real genuine concern. However, there were a few Germans who were detained at the border a couple of weeks ago, or last week actually, which has probably caused a little bit of an international spat, but generally speaking, this is more of a political thing than anything. Similarly, the fire at Heathrow Airport in London yesterday may be a case of politics entering into the more kinetic phase. It's really hard to tell at this point. The United Kingdom suffers much from the same kinds of problems as the United States and many westernized nations around the world, in that when something happens, when there's a critical infrastructure failure, it's often very, very hard to determine, was this incompetence? Was this malice? Was this some kind of accident or some kind of deliberate action? Clearly, authorities thought that the Heathrow fire was more of a terrorist attack sort of thing, as the counterterrorism police were leading the investigation at first. I don't know if that's continued on. Of course, this is speculative, but it seems like the counterterrorism guys have just kind of moved on from this, and they're kind of treating it more along the lines of a just an accident or some other kind of not terrorism related incident. Hard to say though, however, because of the suspicious timing with this and actions throughout Eastern Europe. But once again, the United Kingdom suffers from much the same thing as the United States. So, for instance, a lot of British politicians are pointing out, or at least they're making the accusations. I cannot vouch for the veracity of this information, but the accusations are being made that Heathrow Airport, not only did they put their emergency backup generators at the same site, like physically located next to each other and next to the electrical substation that caught fire, there are some accusations that they actually removed a lot of their diesel generator support in favor of biomass generators. Now again, I cannot vouch for any of that. I don't know if that's true or not, but the accusations are being made. I guess we'll find out, but generally speaking, what is quite clear is that whatever generators were on site were located at the actual substation that caught fire, and thus were also impacted by the fires. So yeah, a lot of egg on faces over this one. It's kind of embarrassing, but I'd be very interested to read the incident report or whatever investigation comes about. There might even be an inquiry over this, I don't know, but Heathrow provides a lot of money for the nation, so this airport going down for almost a full day, that's pretty devastating when it comes to the economic impact, so a lot of attention is going to be placed on this, I think. Moving over to Eastern Europe, it seems like it's getting harder to determine how close we are to a peace deal coming to fruition or even just a ceasefire of some kind. This has not been made any better by the United States continuing to fund and send shipments to Ukraine, just like before the election. This has not really done anything to kind of push a peace agreement. But that kind of stuff aside, one of the things that has really kind of inflamed tensions is the attack on the Ingalls main operating base in Russia. So a few days ago, Ukraine conducted a drone attack on Ingalls main operating base once again down in southwestern Russia. Now, I know this may not seem very significant to a lot of people, and this has happened multiple times before. However, this latest attack was rather substantial. So let's take a look at this via the imagery that we have courtesy of Maxar. Now, for the previous strikes, we didn't really have this capability, or we had the capability, but there was very little interest in it. But now we have actually Maxar imagery, really good civilian commercial imagery of the section of the base at Ingalls that was struck. So here we have the before picture before the drone strike was conducted, and here we have afterwards. And as we can see, this section of the base was quite literally decimated. We can see here, I'm of course no imagery expert, but just for those of you who may have a hard time seeing the image, here I've highlighted all the buildings that were rather kinetically destroyed by the Ukrainian drone strike. And just in the context of where this particular site is located at Ingalls, this annex is located just to the east of the runway. So once again, nothing particularly new. However, it is interesting because I don't think a lot of Americans or even Western Europeans understand the significance of this, especially in the context of what it means for a superpower's main operating base to be attacked really at all. And what I mean by that is, if we zoom out just a little bit, and if we understand the history of Ingalls main operating base, we might start to understand that this is not just any ordinary base. This is a military base where Russia stores nuclear weapons. So this is one of Russia's cream of the crop kind of military bases. They only have two main operating bases, one in the east and one in the west. This one, going all the way back to the Soviet Union, their main doctrine was to basically load a lot of their aircraft with nuclear weapons and then deploy them from these main operating bases to forward operating bases to attack those pesky Americans, right, over maybe say a polar route or something like that. Now, of course, this isn't really that much of a risk anymore these days. However, Russia still does store nuclear weapons here. This is the Saratov 6-3 nuclear weapons storage facility, and they have taken a lot of efforts to modernize it over the past few years, especially since the Ukrainian war, and so they are definitely still using it. It is definitely a hopping facility. So I know that it may be hard to kind of encapsulate this, so let me just explain the analogy that I think of when I think of something like this. This is equivalent, in my mind, sort of equivalent to the United States invading Iraq to do what we wanted to do in Iraq, and Saddam somehow having the ability to drop a lot of bombs on Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri. You know, that's the kind of impact. So imagine if we invaded Iraq to topple Saddam. We're trying to drive to Baghdad, right? And Saddam Hussein ends up bombing Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri, where we have a lot of B-2s and nuclear weapons. So maybe we can see how this is just a little bit more concerning than the average tit-for-tat kind of thing in a regional war. Like it or not, a superpower being involved in a war is a very serious thing. It's a very serious thing, whether it's justified or not. I'm not trying to take any side on this. The issue is that now we're starting to see some pretty serious things happen a little bit more routinely and a little bit more seriously. Of course, the pro-Ukraine guys will say, well, if Russia didn't want to have their nuclear base targeted, then they shouldn't have started the war. They can say that all they want to, but it's not going to do anybody any good if a nuclear bunker gets struck, and we have a very serious problem on our hands. I don't think any of us are going to feel very good typing away our snarky comments on Twitter if that were to happen. So either way, the United States is facilitating a small regional power attacking the nuclear bases of a larger superpower, and it seems like because we've had this election and it's okay because we now have new political leadership and it's okay because peace is around the corner. Well, no, it's not. We may be hopeful for that, and the past few weeks have shown that we're closer to peace than we have been in 4 years, but that doesn't necessarily mean that at the last minute things aren't going to get very risky. And right now, the war in Ukraine is entering its riskiest phase. It was extremely risky right in the very, very beginning, those first couple of weeks of the war, and now it's going to be very, very risky at the very end of it because Ukraine is exceptionally desperate, rightly or wrongly. That's what they are, and the United States has been feeding that desperation for a very long time. So they struck an annex at Ingalls today. They may strike Saratov 6-3 tomorrow. Who knows, you know? And I'm just a little bit concerned about that, and I'm a little bit concerned that nobody else is concerned, if that makes any sense. So, of course, it's not like there's anything we can do about it, but it's something to be mindful of that, yeah, don't get complacent here. Don't think that just because we have very real chances for peace does not necessarily mean that at the last minute that peace can't be yanked away and this thing get kinetic once again. So, a lot of people are in the attitude of, well, I'll believe there will be a ceasefire when I see it. I'm kind of in that camp a little bit too, but we don't want to be entirely that pessimistic, I guess. But we're definitely entering into the phase again where something happening halfway around the world can definitely impact us here at home, especially if we have vulnerabilities to our electrical substations, maybe at airports, if you know what I'm saying. So definitely a case of we're not out of the woods just yet. Same story in the Middle East, where Turkey appears to be experiencing quite a bit of civil unrest due to President Erdogan essentially just arresting all of his political opposition. This is not entirely surprising at all, and if you check out a lot of Turkish social media accounts, not a lot of people are surprised by this. There's a lot of people upset by it, but not a lot of people surprised. This does happen every few years, but regardless of how normal this is in Turkey, it's very important to remember in the context of what's happened in Syria. We've had a government overthrown in Syria. We're looking at very interesting times in Romania as well. And now Turkey may be up next for a more, external color revolution kind of effort. Now, from what I can tell, it looks like most of the consternation within Turkey is very domestic and very organic, unlike the developments in Romania to cancel the elections there, and unlike in Syria where, well, obviously that's a longer story, but in Turkey it seems like it's more along the lines of a real legitimate protest effort. So it's something to be aware of, especially considering, a lot of people don't care about Turkey, but Turkey is a NATO member, and there's a potential for some kind of American involvement there, I guess, at some point. But for the most part, it just kind of seems like it'll probably fizzle out, but who knows? So, also down in the Gaza-Israel region, the ceasefire is over and the war is back on in full force as expected. Yemen has conducted a few attacks with cruise missiles and drones over the past few days. Unknown success rate. Seems like fairly unsuccessful, otherwise we would probably see them claiming some level of success. Yemen's a long way from Israel, and their missiles have traditionally been intercepted by the American Navy in the Red Sea. Protests are fairly common throughout Israel in some places, but the protests are generally not for the reasons that people tend to think they are. And in the context of the rest of the region, the United States has very clearly established a new red line for the Iranians, which generally is summarized best, I think, by saying any Yemeni attack will be considered to be an attack by the Iranians, because the Iranians support the Yemeni or the Houthi government. It's a tale as old as time, very, very similar to the past few years of conflict in the region. But yeah, I just wanted to kind of point that out because, like I said a few weeks ago, you can have peace two ways. You can have peace through a negotiated peace and a negotiated cessation of fighting, or you can have peace by complete and total dominating victory. And I think it's very clear now as what the American policy is in the region. So moving over to the Far East Theater, I wanted to briefly mention something that came out a few weeks ago. I've touched on this before, but because these images have circulated on social media over the past few days, I think it's very interesting, so I'll kind of mention it. So China has been busy over the past few years, and they have implemented this sort of new idea for landing barges, and we have recently seen the so-called sea trials of these devices. So these gigantic machines are used to land resources on a beach, and so you can very, very, very clearly, just by looking at the images, you can see what these devices are to be used for. Like many people have noted before, these are very likely to be used in a potential conflict with Taiwan. Now we can see the various artist renderings of what this type of invasion might look like using these types of craft, but this is one of those things where you see the one image, you see the videos, and you think, that's interesting, because for many of you out there, especially the Marines and anyone who has any sort of primitive knowledge of amphibious operations. Anyone who's really seen the movie Saving Private Ryan can look at this and form very, very strong opinions about the potential success rate of these particular devices. But I'm very, very curious to read about what China's, what mentality, why do they think this is going to work, essentially. I want to know, why do they think this will not get immediately sunk within 38 seconds of getting anywhere near the coast? Like, why do they think this will work? Because clearly they do think it's going to work. These things probably cost hundreds of millions of dollars to build. So, well, I mean, at least the fleet we've seen so far. So, why do they think this is going to work? I don't know, but they clearly do. They're not building these things just on a farce. They're not building these things just to trick us. I mean, they could be, but this is a pretty big investment for just a feint or some kind of deception operation. But anyway, very interesting. I'm sure that we will see a lot more of this in the future. We'll see how many more they build. This could also just be a proof of concept to see if something like this would work. I mean, China has no problem sacrificing most of their population in a war, but we also have to remember that China has never really waged an amphibious war or really any war at all, ever. So it's very interesting to see the doctrine points being made by a second world nation that hasn't really gotten any combat experience with amphibious operations. So yeah, I guess we'll have to see what they do with this. I'm going to, obviously keep an eye on this to see how this works. I don't necessarily think this is an imminent indicator of an invasion. So for those of you guys who remember my old stoplight chart for invasion indicators, this is an indicator of they're rather serious about Taiwan, but I don't think this is an indicator of them getting ready to imminently roll these up to Taiwan's beaches. I mean, it could be, but it doesn't seem like it's going to work out super well, and they're going to need a few thousand more of these. I think they've got 5 so far. But anyway, I guess we'll see how it works, and be very interested to see their testing on these, because it's not like they can hide them, so we'll have good satellite images of these as they go through their testing phases and as the Chinese learn a lot of new things. So very interesting to see, though. So that's all I have for today. Let's move on to the intercepted GhostNet reports. Again, fairly light week for news, but a lot of people testing, which is good. A lot of people staying on for a lot longer than normal, and just kind of chatting back and forth with a lot of other people, which is great to see. A lot of call signs logged. We can see a few people here talking about how many call signs they have seen throughout the communications window, and a few people cut and pasted a condensed version of the wire report for that day, which is good. It's also great to see people pushing the Obsidian link so that people can get the full report if they wanted it. It's probably easier to do that, but again, when it comes to off-grid kind of information sharing, there's a lot of different ways to skin that cat, right? So yeah, pretty interesting week. I've been putting in a lot of time working on a lot of updates to the GhostNet document and program and all kinds of things, but it's going to be a long time before I have anything to share on that front. So again, we don't want to slip into complacency and just say, well, it's done. No, it's not done. There are a lot of improvements that are being made. I'm working on it. I've got to write a lot of stuff to make this a lot more well-rounded than it is. Even though right now it is a fairly comprehensive plan, there are definitely points of improvement, which I'm definitely making right now. So that's pretty much all I have for today. Thank you all for watching. Thank you for all of your support. Again, the sources can be found here on my Obsidian page throughout the week, and also the slides for this are posted on Patreon. So for anyone who wants documentation, there you go. So thanks again, and we will see you next time. And as always, fight in the shade.